I'm Bernice Bogda. I've been at St. Paul since 2008, so I'm a fairly newcomer, so to say. And I've enjoyed coming here.
50.
It's a very friendly community, family-oriented, so much so like my home church. And we love all the children that come with their families, and people have been most welcoming.
Well, I joined St. Paul way back, and my husband lived in the neighborhood, and he saw the first church burn, and little did he know that how important that would be to us. And the only thing I can claim is my mom gave the first money for the school. I brought some money down to Pastor, and he said that's just what I need to start the school. So Pastor Wunderlich, she had the honor of giving them first money. And as far as my work at St. Paul's, I was financial secretary. I was mostly involved in accounting and that kind of work. And that's about it. It's been a member for over 60-some years.
I'm Lucille Cushman. I was married in 1948, and my husband had a job supplied for him in our hometown, and I had an apartment ready, and I had everything ready for us living in Merrill. When he got a call to come down here to Century to learn something that was beyond being just a bookkeeper. He was a new program starting down here, and he wanted to learn about it. So he said, "Honey Bunch, how would it be if we would move to Stevens Point for just a year, or maybe I'd like to know the program. Then we'll move back to Merrill, and I'll go to an insurance company where I'll have a job, and we'll be living in Merrill." Well, that was about 70 years ago, and I'm still here. While we were waiting to move back home, there was a little school that was started in our church basement. Early 1950s, there were 16 youngsters in the grades 1 to 3, and 16 desks, and a blackboard, and a teacher. And that's all we started with. That's why Lenore called them the Sweet 16 in only the first grades. And we did just fine for a few years, and then the state stepped in, and they said, you have a school in a church basement. Maybe we won't allow you to be here any longer. Do you have any expectations of moving out? Well, we're thinking about getting a school. Okay, we'll give you another year, but we want an honorary system that you're going to prepare for a school for these children to get them out of the basement. So that's what happened. And during that time, the pastor that was at the church moved away, and we got a new pastor, and his name was Pastor Wunderlich. And he came from Minneapolis, and he was gung-ho for parochial schools. The Lord blessed us.
You know, I wanted to be part of the lay ministry group because that's kind of where I worked before, but for some reason I got put on church properties, and I just don't remember when I wasn't. It seems like I was off for a bunch of years when I was traveling for my company, photography, Eastman Kodak Company. But then when I came back, I immediately put back on the board of church properties, and I've been really quite regular, at least since 1999.
65, and through marriage. I've been in a number of things in church. I was financial secretary, I was treasurer, I've been on lay ministry. And one of the things that I've always been the most proud of is the factor that when I came in, that was when they were talking about building the church, or building the school. My vote was one of the affirmative that built the school, because it only passed by about 4 or 5 votes. So I've always been thankful and proud of that factor, that my vote helped to put the original school building up.
Yes, I do. Like I said, when I started, my dad feared electrical storms, lightning hitting close by. And it used to be pretty close. And my mom says, hey, there's a fire somewhere, And she said, turn down Center Street. So we came down Center Street over there, and sure enough, our church was on fire. So we parked right there. We were allowed to stop for a minute. There was a fire truck there. And then when I looked up at the church over there, the entrance, pastor, and I think his name was Berman at the time. I'm not sure, but I think it is. So anyway, he's got an armload of books and everything, and finally, well, we had to get out of there, And then later on, where are we going to hold services? Boy, that was quite a thing, and it took some time, And behold, where we went for services, Lyric Theater. It's no longer here, but there were 2 theaters, Fox Theater, and then east of Fox Theater, about 3 buildings down, was the Lyric Theater. Then the Stevens Point Post Office. So, okay, so they had services over there, and in the meantime, they were cleaning up everything over here. And you know what? The floor was never touched or, ruined or anything. So apparently they cleaned it all off, and maybe they tar papered it or something, and we came back here and had services in the basement.
My dad was a member of the congregation in the years prior to the big burn, and by vocation he was a railroad postal clerk, which means he worked in the mail car, sorting mail. It was a railroad post office, really. And his run started in Chicago and went to Owen. Well, after the fire, he was going to look around at some churches in Chicago and observe various architectural style. So between his runs he had time to spend, and he comes upon St. Paul Lutheran Church, which he seemed to think was the oldest church in Chicago, Lutheran Church. So anyway, he went over to look at it, and it so happened that the city of Chicago wanted that property as they were expanding. It was desirable, so they bought it. And he noted this church bell sitting in someplace in the aisle in the church, and it wasn't in very good shape. Parts were broken and so on. Well, he packed that away in his memory, and somewhere, as I understand it, about a year later, he went back and asked them if it was for sale, because they wanted to get rid of it as junk, 2,000 pounder. So he bought it, and I don't know how they got it to the railroad area, but it was loaded in his mail car, and they shipped it up to Stevens Point and unloaded here, which was convenient. And through some kind of effort, they hoisted the bell up into the belfry, and of course we hear it ringing today every Sunday for every service, unless the temperature is too cold in the wintertime, and then we don't ring it.
came here with my wife and 2 little kids in 1971-72 school year. And I came from 9 years in Alma, Missouri, where I taught 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for a while, and then just 5th and 6th, and then just 7th and 8th, and like that. And we just happened to decide that we were ready to move at the time that they were looking for somebody here. And, I didn't know anything about this place except that it was north of where I used to live. I grew up in the southern part of Wisconsin. I went to high school in Reedsburg High School. I taught 7th and 8th grade most all the time I was here, except some 6th grade kind of toward the end, and some 5th grade once in a while. And then I also served as principal in my spare time. And I was just thinking on the way over here, what were the really important things that got done here while I was here? And a lot of them weren't something that I did, but we had, I guess, one thing you can notice if you're in these hallways is that they're a lot bigger than they used to be. The first remodeling added on an improved entryway, a large gathering room for the congregation, an elevator, and an improved kitchen and lunchroom. And that lasted us for a while, and then we outgrew that, and the second building program added on the what we still call a new addition, I guess. Gave us more classroom space, more meeting room area, and just about filled that up now, I understand. Another thing that I thought was important to the growth and maintenance of the school was we hired good people. Some of them stayed and are still here, and some of them had retired. And before that, we had people in and out all the time, teaching positions changing all the time, and with only 4 teachers, that was a huge thing. There was no continuing thing from one year to the next. So we got, besides you, we got John Rubel, we got Kurt Lamb, we got Mrs. West, we got a number of other people like that stayed for a number of years and really gave us a stable background. Another thing that I tried that I liked really well but didn't survive was having an assistant principal. For the first year I had Kathy Bartle as the assistant principal. It was a part of her call. She almost made her refuse to take it, but she stuck it out for the year, and then she said, I can't do this another time. So then Kurt Lamb took her place, and well, I think it did him a lot of good. I think it was helpful to him. It was helpful to me. This was a guy that was kind of afraid to lead morning prayer, and he did the graduation ceremony, and he did all those other things where you have to talk a lot, and he did fine, and I think he learned that he could do it, and put in some time as a temporary principal too, I believe.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess I'd better mention that I had a lot of support from my wife. An awful lot of long hours and late nights coming home from ball games and Board of Education meetings and council meetings and voters meetings and meetings, and she put up with it all that time, which I couldn't have done it without her being there. Well, while you're listing all those things, of course, the most important thing is we had the Lord's guidance throughout all of that. And a lot of times those things happened, we didn't even realize they were going to be a big deal. And He saw something in it that we continued it. And I think this school has progressed a terribly long way from 1971 or 2, because we may have our little discipline problems, but they're nothing like they were. And I think we have more really dedicated students, and I think the pandemic year really showed that they were willing to hang in there and do what needed to be done to learn, and because of that, I think got a great advantage over people that didn't go to school at all for the whole last year and aren't going to school now. So, Lord works in wondrous ways to do what He wants to have done.
Mysterious ways.
He uses people like us.
So we were looking to replace the Wangeren organ, which was located above where the pastor preaches, pretty much in the sacristy or in the chancel area. And we looked at moving it to the back where the balcony was. The balcony was expanded as part of that project, that initial 1980 project. And in 1996, we had a chance to buy a Hilborn Roosevelt made organ. Hilborn Roosevelt was a second cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. He built about 850 organs during his lifetime. These organs were what they called parlor organs, which were used for entertaining people in your large home if you were usually on the East Coast and were wealthy. And some of these organs survived, and one of them had been purchased by a fellow by the name of Robert Whiting, who had the organ in Pennsylvania. The organ was restored by Patrick Murphy, the organ builder, that ultimately installed it here. And we got wind of the fact that this was available for purchase, and it fit within our budget, but it also fit our congregation pretty well in terms of its size. So the organ was purchased in 1995, and it was installed and dedicated the year following in 1996. Well, the St. Paul Lutheran Cemetery was started in the late 1800s by the congregation for the purpose of providing burials for its members. And there are some very old burials here. There's even a Grand Army of the Republic from the Civil War stone and marker. So there's a lot of history to this. But it's kind of interesting because for a period of time there were burials, and then the idea of using our cemetery fell into disfavor. And I'm not sure why that happened, but I think it had to do with the location, because when the cemetery was first opened, Patch Street was nothing but a dirt road, and it was on the other side of the tracks, and so it was a little more difficult to get to. And the people that rode the rails in those days were maybe not always the most savory, and so people just shied away from having their loved ones buried out here. So there's a big gap from the oldest until we start to get more burials in the late 40s. There still weren't burials out here during the 50s and during the 60s, but in the 1970s, people began to look at the cemetery with a slightly different light. Patch Street was about to be paved and put all the way through across the Plover River. And people started to ask about purchasing lots again. So the church began to sell lots. And I was appointed, I guess, by default as the sexton of the cemetery in about 1976 by Pastor Dave, who basically told me I needed to do this, so I did. So in the 1970s, lots started to be sold again, and in the 1980s and 1990s, I'm not going to say picked up hugely, but we would have perhaps 3 or 4 lot sales or burials every year, and that number has slowly gotten bigger and bigger. In the very recent years, We've tried to establish a more durable way for the cemetery to be managed because it requires records. And it should be pointed out that all the earliest records for burials from the late 1800s and early in the 1900s, those are all lost. We have no idea where they are. All we have is one old map which just shows some of the families that purchased a number of lots all at once to use for the family. So we needed a better way to keep our records. They had been kept manually for 25 years once we started selling lots again. But we've now contracted with the Stevens Point Area Catholic Cemetery Association, which has the program, the computer program to do this kind of work, and the vault storage to protect the kind of records that you need to keep. So they take care of our record keeping for us, but we still do, as congregational members, the upkeep and maintenance and the overall planning. This past year, a columbarium was added to the cemetery. A columbarium is a place where you can inter ashes above ground. And people like this concept more and more because it's more environmentally friendly. It's a little less expensive. It is a little more visible. And that process of getting that columbarium installed here was pretty much spearheaded by Butch Weege, one of the members here at St. Paul.
Okay, well, we came to St. Paul in January of 1978. We came across from Utah in below zero weather. It was our welcome to Wisconsin. But Bob received the call in November of 77, and at that time he had 3 other calls. And so first of all, we knew God was saying go, because he had 4 calls. Yeah, you can leave Utah now. And then Bob was really drawn to St. Paul. After our visit here, he immediately connected with Pastor Dake and felt that as a person who grew up non-Christian and became a Christian as an adult, that he could learn a lot from someone like Pastor Dake. All the time Bob was in ministry here, the whole 25 years, he never stopped treating Pastor Dake as his mentor and counselor. It was a wonderful growth for Bob to be under Pastor Dake. And Bob's focus on ministry was always preaching and teaching. He loved to preach from the original text. Every sermon he did, he translated from the Greek or the Hebrew, depending on Old or New Testament. He loved teaching classes. He loved the school, was dear to his heart. He never missed an opportunity to do a wedding or a funeral or a baptism if he could do it in clear conscience, because he was an adult convert, and he just always saw those as opportunities to witness to unbelievers. And many of his adult classes had people in them from those contacts. It was a good growing time. When Pastor Dake retired, Bob asked the elders if they would consider a partner pastor rather than calling an associate pastor and under Bob. And no one wanted to do that. Even the district said this will never work. And but God had other plans. Mm-hmm. And he brought Keith and Bob together. And for years they had a very successful partner ministry here. It was just a gift from God, that partnership. When Keith left and took the mission call to Minnesota, then they made Bob senior pastor, and he mentored first. Mark Friedrich came first, and then as Bob was close to retirement, they called another associate pastor, John Wessel, and Bob retired in 2003. But they were very busy years. Bob taught Greek to most of the students from the North Wisconsin district that went to seminary did courses in Greek with Bob first, so that to make sure they would pass Greek at the seminary. And he loved doing that. He taught a semester of Greek at UWSP when the professor got ill. And everything about it Bob loved. He was in love with this congregation and this ministry here. He gave his heart to the Lord first when he became a Christian, and to this, I have to say, to the ministry here at St. Paul. Yeah. And I loved being here. I didn't see much of him, but I taught Sunday school at St. Paul for 22 years. I loved it. I taught third grade, which I just loved because you can still hug them and they still like jokes and they read. Perhaps you were here when we did that, when the church governance changed. We went from voters meetings and elders, and we had lots of studying and workshops, and we went to a church congregation with ruled by boards and an executive committee. That was major in the growth, I think, because it expanded the ministry. That was definitely a God thing, because Bob passed in April of 2010, and we had a lot of memorials, plus the men's club had done an auction of all of the woodworking equipment that had been given to Bob at retirement, and that raised some money. And then with what the family wanted to do, we were looking at, a good sum. So I wanted it to be something that had meaning and worshipful. And there were 3 things. One of them was maybe a gate at the cemetery. So Tina and Butch and I started driving around to cemeteries. Boston Funeral Home gave us some cemeteries to look at. One of them was Runkle, and we went out there and looked at it, and it was quite an attractive cemetery gate, and the sexton had done it, and it happened to be Mr. Kokonutsky, who lived right on Highway 39, not far from that cemetery. So we immediately drove over to his farm, and he took us back into the big barn where he did all his welding work. And we're sitting there, and he was just, we were trying to explain, kind of what we're thinking about, and he just was dragging his feet. You could see he was nearing retirement. This wasn't a project. He just didn't know if he could do it, and he was going to think about it and get back to us. So we waited and waited. He didn't call back, and I don't know if it was Butch or I checked with him, and he thought he could do it. He called his son in Alaska, and he would come home for the summer and help, and could we come out then and we talk about what we wanted. Okay, so we got out there and we sat down, and he started drawing on the floor. He had this whole thing worked out. He in his mind already, he knew there were going to be flames, and that for every Christian, and it was going to be the gate of grace, and it was just, once he decided he was going to do it, he had the vision to do it, and it was incredible. And I just hope everybody at St. Paul gets to go out there and look at it, really, because everything about it is worshipful and meaningful. The key that opens the gate to heaven, the eye that when we're awakened again on that Great Awakening Day is in one gate, and the shepherd staff and the church bell tower is on one post, and our home with the cross is on the other. Everything about it is meaningful. And he was just drawing that on the floor for us. So he said, "Is that about what you want?" We said, "Yeah."